Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to another day of Kaladesh previews. Now, as you can tell from the title screen here, we have some huge news to talk about. Not only did we see all the basic lands, not only did we get 9 more preview cards to look at from Kaladesh, but we also found out about Kaladesh Inventions, which are basically Kaladesh's version of Expeditions. So if you're familiar with Expeditions from the Battle for Zendikar block, you'll have a pretty good idea of what we're talking about here. And furthermore, we've seen 4 of these spoiled today. Now, if you check out MTG Daily, Mark Rosewater's article goes into a lot of detail about these inventions. And as a matter of fact, this is going to be a continuous thing now in future standard releases as well. They're all going to have a subset very similar to Expeditions. Collectively, these are going to be known as masterpieces. So Expeditions and Inventions collectively are masterpieces, and every block going forward is going to have something very similar. Now, there's a lot of detail to talk about. I'm going to go over all of that in a few minutes once we get to the Inventions. But first, let's look at the other stuff that was previewed today. Let's start off with basic lands. Now, traditionally, if you look at the basic lands that get the most play in Constructed, or if somebody's looking for a particular basic land to just add to their collection or put in their decks, they usually go for things like full art land, or sometimes they just go for just brightly colored lands. Typically, those are the most popular lands throughout the history of Magic. I think players get sick of kind of the dull black, browns, grays that you see a lot of times in the basic lands, and they want something that pops a little bit. So you'll notice that cards like the Lorwyn Swamp, for example, which has like flowers all over it, or the Mountain in Mirage that has the red sky behind it. These are cards that are actually worth a few dollars just because a lot of players really like them and want to put them in their decks. I feel like a similar thing will eventually happen with these cards. You're going to notice as we go through these basic lands, they are very bright, they really pop, the art looks amazing, and even the swamps, a couple of them are really brightly lit. So you might not appreciate these in the next few months when you see them opened in like every booster pack, but I think a year, 2 years down the road, I think players will really appreciate these cards, and you'll see a lot of these in constructed decks. So here's the plains. Here are the islands, which look incredible. Here's the swamps. The middle one's a little bit dark. It looks kind of like almost like a Ravnica sewer, but just with more technology. But the one on the left and right, those are both very brightly lit. Next we have mountains. I really like the one on the right. It looks awesome. And finally, forests. All right, so let's move into the 9 regular Kaladesh cards first, and we're going to start off with Consulate Surveillance. This costs a white and 3. It's an enchantment uncommon. When this enters the battlefield, you get 4 energy counters. You can pay 2 energy, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn by source of your choice. So I think this is a limited card. I think where this fits is one of the aggressive builds that you could find in white. White does have a lot of aggressive small creatures with evasion. They play really nice with vehicles, and a lot of times when you play an aggressive deck, it starts off really strong, and then as the game goes on and your opponent gets some blockers out, things start to slow down, and if you don't have any answers for those blockers, unfortunately, you kind of take a lot of damage back in the crackback, or else you just kind of get stuck and have to start chump blocking. This card hopefully will prevent that in some cases. You play this on turn 4, your opponent starts to get their big blockers out, you get some 4/4s or 5/5s on the battlefield, you can still keep attacking in with your small flyers and not worry about a big crackback because you have this card to nullify at least some of that damage. So I think that's why it exists. It's not going to fit into every limited build, but if you're in that archetype, you'll probably be pretty happy to run one of these and might help you squeak out a game here and there. The other reason you might run it is simply because it gives you energy counters, which might matter in certain decks depending on what kind of energy payoffs you have. So if you need something at the 4-drop that's going to give you a fair amount of energy, this does fit the bill, so it could probably fit into a deck like that as well. So it's probably not always going to make your cut in limited. If you're in the market for either of those things, though, it could be good for you. If you're not, this card doesn't do so much because you play this on, say, turn 4 or 5, and it's almost like you're taking your turn off to play this, and if you're not in one of those other 2 archetypes, it might not be enough value at that point for you. Speaking of aggressive creatures in white, here's one that's a French language spoiler. Loosely translated, we think it's Tool Shaper Exemplar. 1 white, it's a Dwarf Artificer. At the beginning of your combat step, if you control an artifact, tool, shape, or exemplar, it gains +2/+1 until end of turn. If you control at least 3 artifacts, it also gains first strike till end of turn. So this thing is crazy, and this is a 1-drop just beater, right? So let's face it, you play this on turn 1, you play any artifact on turn 2, and you're attacking in on turn 2 with a 3/2, that's awesome. But if you play an equipment card, if you get some cheap equipment or something and put this equipment on the creature, that's amazing, because not only is it getting the +2/+1, but it's getting the bonus from the equipment. And also notice that the +2/+1 only comes into play at the beginning of the combat step until end of turn. So the beginning of your turn, opponent's turns, this thing is just a 1/1. That's real fragile, so having equipment on it really kind of helps hopefully keep it alive a little longer. So this is going to be great for you in Limited. We haven't seen all of the cards in the set yet. I'm assuming we're going to see some cool equipment coming up this week, stuff like that. So there's probably some cards that really play well with this. This is a rare, so you're not going to see it all the time. But if you happen to draft this and maybe some good equipment to back it up, this could be a really, really strong Limited card. And because it's so cheap and because the ability is so good, I think this will see play in a multitude of different formats. I could see this being decent in a more aggressive Vintage deck because, again, you're playing things like Moxes and stuff. This will immediately be able to tack in as a 3/2. That's pretty awesome. Legacy has some great artifacts to back it up. And when you look at Legacy and Modern, you have things like the swords that are very powerful. Imagine just equipping a sword to this thing and just getting in there for some damage. It could get pretty crazy pretty fast, actually. So this is a fantastic card. If there's a weak point to it, it might be that it's not quite as good in a multiplayer game. So this might not be a card that you'll be super excited to play in Commander, for example, at least in some decks, just because this is a very efficient card against one opponent. But when you start looking at a game with a lot of opponents and higher life totals, it's maybe not quite as exciting, but it's still a really amazing card. Really good cube card, too. Next we have Glint Nest Crane. 1 blue and 1. It's a 1/3 uncommon bird. It has flying. When this enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So first off, in Limited, I've played 1/3 flyers for 2 before, and they're just fine. I've been satisfied with them. Now, they're not super exciting, but they do block some creatures sometimes. They let you get in for a little bit of damage, especially in the early game. They can be decent Limited cards. This one, on top of that, has a great ability attached to it. If you have a fair amount of artifact targets in your deck, which you probably will if you're playing Kaladesh, you'll go ahead and play this. You'll be able to dig a little bit deeper, maybe get a little bit of value from this card by letting it replace itself with one of the artifacts that, who knows, could have been 4 cards down in your deck that you got to a little bit earlier. So that's actually kind of awesome, right? I think this is actually possibly playable in Standard if there's a artifact themed deck that emerges from Kaladesh. Now, we haven't seen the whole set spoiled, so it's kind of hard to say that for sure right now, but I have a feeling it will be pushed enough that you might see a deck like that arise. And if it's playing blue, then this could be a card that just allows you to dig a little deeper in your deck and get to your threats a little faster. So it'll be interesting to see if that pans out. Another thing to note on this is there's a lot of flicker effects in Kaladesh that we've seen so far, so any additional enters the battlefield effects could lead to some value if you have some flicker effects to play with as well. So very interesting card. If nothing else, I think it'll be a good Limited card. Next we have Lawless Broker. 1 black and 2. It's an Etherborn rogue. This is a common 3/2. When this dies, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So it's not always going to hit. I mean, if you don't have another creature to put the counter on, or your opponent plays a board sweep or something, then you kind of lose that value. But you know what? In Limited, it's just fine. I mean, paying 3 for a 3/2 creature in Limited is good enough. I mean, those stats are just fine. If you happen to get more value out of it when it dies, wonderful bonus on top. But I think this is a good Limited card for the 3 spot. Next we have Prakata Club Security, and this is 1 black and 3. It's an Etherborn Warrior 3/4. This is a common. It's vanilla. I love the fact that there's a club security guard in the set, though. I think that's kind of awesome. So it's like a bouncer or something, I guess. But anyway, there's not much to say about this card other than the flavor is awesome. It's a Limited card. If you need something for your 4 spot, it's there. It's not always going to make your cut, obviously. You may have stronger cards, but if you're looking for something to fill out your curve at 4, this will be there for you. Next we come to Combustible Gear Hulk. 2 red and 4. This is an artifact creature construct, mythic, 6/6 first strike. When this enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards. If the player doesn't, put the top 3 cards of your library into the graveyard, and then this will deal combat damage to that player equal to the total converted mana cost of those cards. Now, this is the last of the Gearhulk cycle that we've been waiting to see, and it's going out with a bang. I mean, this card's incredible. The whole cycle was incredible. I was just very impressed by all of these cards. This one, I don't know, maybe is my favorite. It's amazing, right? So first off, let's talk about limited. You pay 6 for 6/6 for a striker. I mean, you could stop me right there. It's a windmill slam first pick anyway, right? Much less the ability tacked onto it. And that ability, let's talk about that for a second. I mean, your opponent's going to almost always have to just let you Ancestral Recall because they can't take the risk of what you could be turning from the top of your deck. You could be doing massive damage with the cards on top of your deck. That's crazy. So they're just going to have to hand you these cards. I mean, unless they're at 20 life and they feel like gambling, right? For the most part, they're just giving you 3 cards on top of the fact that you got yourself a 6/6 first striker on the board. That's incredible. I think this is going to be easily standard playable, very easily, especially in this current environment. There's a lot of big creatures out there. I mean, things like Emrakul and even Bedlam Reveler, that they have high converted mana costs, but you don't necessarily cast them for those full mana costs. That makes them very powerful and playable in standard, but at the same time, if you happen to flip one of these with this card, you're doing massive damage. And your opponent, again, if they're aware of those cards in your deck, just can't take that risk. They won't be able to. They're just going to have to hand you more cards. I mean, the only slight downside to this card is if you are already far behind and losing to evasion creatures, it might not necessarily save you in a case like that because your opponent might be able to take the damage from the card flip if they're still at high life, or they might just give you the cards but they're just doing damage so quickly that it might just be too late anyway. But you know what, at that point not a whole lot of cards probably would have saved you, right? So now if you're already ahead or the game's even, this card is just going to close it out. It's just that good. As far as Modern goes, I don't know if we'll see a lot of Modern play or not. It's at the 6-drop spot. That's a little bit awkward for Modern because Modern is such a fast game right now. It just depends on how good that ability ends up being. It's actually a really good ability, so I wouldn't count it out necessarily, but I kind of think, like, for example, Inferno Titan doesn't see a whole lot of Modern play. Primeval Titan does, but that's because of its effect to be able to fetch lands. That's the main reason that sees the play it does, because it combos well in a couple different decks. This, though, might be strong enough just on its own to get there, so that remains to be seen. But if nothing else, definitely amazing in Standard. This is a bomb in Limited, and of course another good Commander in Cube card. I would like to see someone maybe take the Titans out of their cube and replace them with these cards, and maybe if you're tired of the Titans, see how these play. I think they're very comparable in a lot of ways. Maybe not quite as strong as those cards were, but very, very good. Next we have Blossoming Defense. It's 1 green for an instant uncommon. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains hexproof until end of turn. This is a pretty powerful little uncommon. I mean, look at it this way. Giant growth, very powerful effect. This is similar in some ways, but it's a little more versatile. Instead of giving the creature +3/+3, it gives it +2/+2, but also hexproof. So now you can use this in a couple different situations. For example, if your opponent has spot removal to take out a creature, you can play this for 1 green and save that creature, or you can treat it more like a traditional giant growth type effect and use it when you're either attacking in or blocking as a combat trick. Now, if you do that, you do have to keep in mind if your opponent has removal or direct damage and this is on the stack, they can still get in there and take out that creature. That'll probably happen occasionally, but for the most part, this is a nice little versatile way to save a creature or get a combat trick. This type of effect usually feels like it belongs more in white than green, so it's kind of cool to see it in a different color. It's very strong though. You'll be happy to play a couple of these in your deck in Limited. You'll certainly find a place to use it at some point in a matchup, and also I think it's strong enough to see Standard play. It's really that good, so keep an eye out for this one. I think this card, it looks kind of innocuous, but I think could be very powerful. Next we have Electrostatic Pummeler. This one costs 3. It's an artifact creature construct. It's a rare 1/1. When this enters the battlefield, you get 3 energy counters, and you can pay 3, and it gets +X/+X till end of turn, where X is its power. Now this was the card that was previewed by Tulare Community College, the professor, so if you haven't seen his video previewing this, I would definitely recommend it. All his preview card videos are awesome. He does an incredible job with them. Okay, let's talk about this card in particular. It's interesting. I feel like I want this to have trample. Like, I don't know, would it be worth paying 4 for it to have trample, or does that start to feel like a little too much? I don't know. Here's where the card's good though. with equipment. You just want to be able to put some equipment on this thing and then pay the energy to get the boost, and hopefully the equipment will give it the trample or else evasion, flying or something, right? Then you have a pretty formidable card on your hands at that point. So in limited, this is a fine rare maybe to pick up as long as you feel like you're going to be able to pick up some equipment to back it up. Again, it's hard to say right now how good it will be in limited because we haven't seen the full set. We don't know what equipment's like at common and uncommon that could play really well with this. If there's a few things out there that are easy to pick up, then okay, this all of a sudden becomes probably a better draft pick than it would have been, right? Also, this is another way to get energy at the 3-drop spot. So if you're looking for that and you're all in on just finding ways to get huge amounts of energy counters, this could be a card you'd be interested in limited as well. At this point, I'd have to say it's probably a limited card until we see perhaps more of this set. If there's something else that really combos well with it, maybe it gets a little standard play. But as of right now, this is kind of a wait and see, I think, in a lot of ways, until we get the full set on Friday. Next, we have Contraband Kingpin. It costs a black and a blue. It's an Etherborn Rogue, uncommon, lifelink 1/4, and when an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, scry 1. This is another good limited card. Now, think of it this way, especially in limited, it only costs 2, but it is 2 different colors. So this is probably more like a 3 or 4 drop than it is a 2 drop a lot of times. But once you get it on the board, I mean, a 1/4 lifelinker is a nice little blocker. It's going to deal with a lot of early threats on the board and protect you from them to help you slow down the game a little bit, get to your mid-game plays and your late-game plays. And the fact whenever you play an artifact, you get to scry 1, that's actually pretty powerful, especially over a period of time if you have enough artifacts. And it is an enters the battlefield effect. So when an artifact enters the battlefield, again, it plays well with a lot of flicker effects that we've seen in the set. So these are all different things that you could kind of draft as you pick up this card and get yourself probably some nice little combos in there too. So it's a good limited card if you draft appropriately or have the right sealed pool. All right, and that brings us to inventions. And you can see the first one on the screen now, Gauntlet of Power. There's 4 we're going to look at today. And quickly before we get into the specifics of the 4 cards, I just wanted to give you some bullet points from Mark Rosewater's article today on Magic the Gathering Daily that gives you a little bit of insight about what to expect from these cards, not only in this set, but going forward. Now, again, if you're familiar with Expeditions from Battle for Zendikar block, you'll be pretty familiar with what's going on in these cards. So here's the major bullet points. Again, if you still have further questions, I would check out the article on MTG Daily because there's a lot of great information in here. First off, the Masterpiece series will exist in a higher rarity than Mythic Rare. Basically, the odds of getting one of these is roughly 1 out of every 144 booster packs. So they're pretty rare, right? Now that's very similar to trying to get, say, one specific foil mythic out of a set. It's actually probably a little less rare than trying to pull that off, but still very rare nonetheless. The Masterpiece series will be reprints of existing cards with one exception. There will often be cards from that set included in the Masterpiece series, like how they used Battle for Zendikar Rare Dual Lands as some of the Zendikar Expeditions, for example. The Masterpiece series, both in presentation and card selection, will be tied thematically to the world appearing in the block. For instance, all of the Kaladesh inventions will be artifact cards presented as Kaladeshi artifacts. The number of Masterpiece series cards may fluctuate, but roughly speaking, we expect each series to be around 50 cards for the whole block. This time around, Kaladesh will have 30 cards, and you'll see 24 more in Ether Revolt. All Masterpiece series cards are printed in English, but they do appear in non-English products. The expansion symbol for each Masterpiece series will be block specific, but distinct from the sets in the block. For example, the Masterpiece series cards in Kaladesh and Ether Revolt will share one unique expansion symbol. They won't use the Kaladesh or Ether Revolt symbols. All Masterpiece cards will exist only in premium foil versions. Masterpiece cards are planned for Magic Online, but will not be redeemable and are not counted as part of the set. Masterpiece cards will not exist in Magic Duels. And finally, Masterpiece cards can be played in any limited format they're opened in, and in any constructed format in which the card is already legal. So what does that mean? Basically, if you go to your pre-release and you open Gauntlet of Power, you can play with it in your pre-release. If you go to a draft and you happen to draft it, you can play with it. However, you can't go ahead and stick this in your standard deck and go to game day and try to play standard with it, because even though you got it out of a Kaladesh pack, it's not standard legal. It would be modern legal because this card was originally printed in Time Spiral, and because it's legal and due to the inclusion in the Time Spiral block, it would then of course be legal in modern. So hopefully that clears that up. I know there's always a lot of questions about that. Now, before we get into the actual cards themselves, just my thought on this real quick. A lot of people have been weighing in. I'm excited about this. Here's the thing, when they first announced Expeditions, I was a little weary. I didn't like the fact that they were going for like a super level of rarity. However, once I saw Expeditions, I was actually very pleased with what they did. As long as you can pick these up other places, because basically these are reprints or cards that you'll find in the regular Kaladesh set, I'm okay with it. I wouldn't be happy if they were putting brand new cards in this rarity level, but I think Wizards is smarter than that. I think they know that would cause a lot of uproar and people would not be happy, especially if you needed those cards to play certain formats or what have you. That's just a road I'm sure they don't want to go down. So I'm good with this. I think this is actually really cool for players, because not only is it a nice surprise when you do open one. I mean, I was lucky enough to open 3 Expeditions in the Battle for Zendikar block. I opened 2 on the channel and I opened 1 in an event. And I didn't open that many cards, so I got really, really lucky. I realize that. So not everyone's going to have that luck, but when you do open one, it's a nice surprise because you're almost like not expecting it. They're so rare, you're not going into opening a pack or a booster box thinking I'm going to get an Expedition today. So when you see one, it's like, wow, this is awesome. This is a really cool surprise. It just kind of adds to the excitement of opening packs. And because of that, it does bring out more of the gamblers. And they do buy and open more booster packs, which means they sell and print more booster packs, which means the standard cards or the regular cards in the set are actually cheaper to get because there's more of them out there. We saw that with the Battle for Zendikar block, and hopefully that will be a trend that will now continue as this process of having Masterpiece cards continues through all standard sets. So this could actually be a big win for players, because not only is it fun to open these unlimited and have a nice surprise sometimes, but also if you're into standard, this is a good way to keep the economy of the cards a little bit more in check and hopefully make the cards more affordable in the long run. So actually, I'm really excited about it. It's very cool, and the new art and the borders and everything they're doing, I think, is amazing. So let's look at these cards. Like I said, this was a card that was reprinted from the Time Spiral block. This is actually a pretty impressive commander card, Gauntlet of Power. He's a lot of playing commander. As a matter of fact, the price of this card really kind of snuck up on me. If you're trying to pick up a copy from Time Spiral, it's like $15 now, believe it or not. And if you want a foil, it's like $26. So this is actually a pretty good inclusion. Maybe not a card I would have thought of as a reprint, but it's definitely a nice one to have if you're lucky enough to open it. Next, we have Hangerback Walker. Now, when the set was coming out, I was kind of wondering to myself, are they going to try to reprint Hangerback Walker? Because it's just so cool and so flavorful for the Kaladesh world. And of course, we saw it in Magic Origins, and it was one of the cards that was previewing Kaladesh for us, if you will. And I kind of thought they probably wouldn't, just because it would be in standard a really long time at that point. And it is a card that has seen standard play and still sees standard play. And it might be a little awkward if it already got reprinted and it just kind of stuck around for as long as it would at that point. So this is a great way to bring this card in, give it new art, really feel the flavor of Kaladesh without necessarily forcing it to stay in standard any longer. So I thought this was a pretty cool inclusion. Next, we have probably the big one of the day. Yep, it's Mana Crypt. It's back again. So Mana Crypt, it was funny because it started out as this card that was never in a set. Many years ago, you had to buy a book and send in a coupon, and then they sent this card to you. And because of that, it was like a $190 card. And now all of a sudden it shows up in like every Magic release. But of course, this was in Eternal Masters as a mythic rare, and because of its inclusion in Eternal Masters, the value of the card did go down to about $80 or so. That's where it's at now. So this is a really nice inclusion, and the art's beautiful. I really love what they did with it, and I love the flavor text too. It kind of makes you wonder like who the anonymous artificer is, who is behind this Mana Crypt on Kaladesh. It's actually pretty awesome. I mean, is it Karn? Is it someone else? It might not be a question they ever answer for us, but I think it's kind of fun to speculate on it. I think they did a really good job with this card, and it's a cool inclusion. If you weren't able to get one in Eternal Masters, then hey, you got another chance, even though it's a really slim chance. And finally, the last one for the day is a card from Kaladesh. It's Verdurous Gearhulk. So my assumption is we're going to see all 5 Gear Hulks in the set, similar to the Battle for Zendikar Rare Lands showed up. All 5 of them were expeditions. So this will probably be the contribution from Kaladesh into these Masterpiece cards. I think it's pretty cool because these are a big cycle. These cards are all awesome. If you happen to hit one as a Masterpiece Invention, that's pretty cool. Good inclusion here. Really excited to see the art on the other 4 because this art is beautiful. So having said that, those are the cards for today, or maybe I should say the cards for right now. I just found out as I was working on this video that they are going to release the rest of the inventions from this set later this afternoon. So I will be back in a few hours probably with another video, and we'll look at the rest of the inventions and the new Masterpiece cards from Kaladesh, which I'm very excited and looking forward to. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.